Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'm sorry they're a little late this morning. We had a technical problem. I want you to see a video about the coronavirus and how and its purported origin, and then we're going to discuss a very serious subject matter of where we are going as a civilization, and Jai Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. How by violating the laws of nature established by Krishna, there's one misery after another. So first of all, we'll watch this film. It's a short one, it's only around 6 minutes, and then we will have our discussion. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thought to have originated from a meat market, where wild animals are also traded. It is therefore a zoonotic disease, meaning that it is a disease that is spread from non-human animals to humans. Consequently, many people are now blaming Chinese culture for this new pandemic. Outrage.
The battle against coronavirus.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The world is currently in the midst of a brand new pandemic, gripped by a new virus called COVID-19, a virus that has killed thousands already. The new coronavirus started in the Chinese city of Wuhan, and similar to the SARS virus from 2003, is strongly thought to have originated from a meat market, where wild animals are also traded. It is therefore a zoonotic disease, meaning that it is a disease that is spread from non-human animals to humans. Consequently, many people are now blaming Chinese culture for this new pandemic, outraged that people in China eat animals such as bats and pangolins. However, outbreaks of zoonotic diseases have happened before in many places around the world. And so, is there a bigger issue at play here? Now, undeniably, the trading of wild animals and poor regulations and standards for trading animals increases the likelihood of zoonotic diseases occurring. But to understand whether or not something like this could happen again, or anywhere else in the world, we need to look to the past and see the origins of other zoonotic diseases. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warns that 3 out of 4 new or emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. And the World Health Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, and World Organization for Animal Health have previously stated that increased demand for animal protein is one of the main risk factors of a pandemic. According to the AIDS Institute, the HIV virus started because of humans eating chimpanzees, and according to the BBC, the recent Ebola outbreak started because of people eating bats. Furthermore, BSE started in the UK because farmers were feeding dead cattle back to cattle, forcing them to cannibalize.
In 1996, the government announced that BSE had jumped to humans.
The unit has identified a previously unrecognized and consistent disease pattern.
And the genetic lineage of the swine flu pandemic was traced back to a pig farm in the US. The one thing that all of these diseases have in common is that they are linked to our exploitation of non-human animals. In a similar way, because COVID-19 is strongly believed to have started in a meat market, the virus was passed to humans in an environment that only existed because of our desire to eat animals. Zoonotic diseases can be created in any country, and regardless of the country they originate from, our exploitation of animals increases the risk of these diseases emerging. COVID-19 is just the latest in a long history of deadly diseases, many of which have been exacerbated because of what we do to animals, and most likely, it will not be the last. And what awaits us in the future could potentially be even more deadly and destructive. It's easy for us to blame China for what is happening because it removes accountability from our own actions. But there have been extreme cases of xenophobia where people who appear Asian have been assaulted simply for the way that they look.
When I looked over, there was someone filming me. It was just coronavirus being repeatedly shouted at me. He punched me twice. The first time he missed, the second time he got me right in between the eyes, and it hit my glasses. My glasses flew off, and my glasses broke my nose as well.
Speaking of the virus, police say it may have played a role in this attack. Commenters on Twitter say he even called the woman diseased.
Every disease has ever came from China, homie. Everything comes from China. It's disgusting.
Yet as history shows us, the problem isn't country specific or culturally specific. And so, if you're stockpiling toilet roll, perhaps it's important to look at what else is in your shopping trolley. Or if you disagree with people eating bats, then the question is, what is the difference between eating bats or eating pigs or chickens? Especially if all three animals are capable of spreading zoonotic diseases. Some zoonotic diseases we can do very little to stop or avoid, but surely that provides us with even more of a reason for us to change our behaviours in order to stop the ones that we can avoid, especially when those ones have historically been among the most pernicious, severe and destructive of all. How can we claim that exploiting animals is a personal choice when doing so not only kills trillions of non-human animals, but in turn increases our risk of pandemics? How can we point the finger at others for the actions and problems that we are also responsible for causing? If COVID-19 can teach us anything, it must be that in the blink of an eye, everything can change. And we must ensure that when it dissipates, we do not go back to business as usual. As long as we exploit others, we increase our risk of these things happening again. How many more have to die? How many more viruses does there need to be? How many more need to suffer? And at what point does enough become enough? As we all find ourselves united under the same global crisis, on opposite sides of the world, but dealing with the same threat, can we use this time to reflect on our actions, how we've consumed, how we've lived, how we've eaten? The whole world is coming together during this crisis. People are showing how much strength we all have together in unity. People singing from their balconies, isolated, but not alone. It is times like these where we see the beauty of our species and the interconnectedness of all life. We share this planet together as a species, but also among others as well. Let us use this crisis to learn from our mistakes. Let us learn to treat everyone who lives here with respect, and to also respect the planet itself. We may not be able to end all suffering or all pandemics, but we can come together to end those that are caused by our exploitation of others.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very informative video and it's giving a good idea.
The predictions about
where the coronavirus began.
The catastrophe that is the...
So now I want to discuss basically the wrong direction of modern civilization and how to correct this interminable or unending problem of pandemic diseases, natural catastrophes, and other plagues that are disturbing us today as they did in ancient times. You have the 10 plagues of Egypt, where civilization, and you had also other great civilizations like the Greek civilization, the Roman civilization, and other civilizations that collapsed because of, and of course the Soviet Union, because of natural and artificial causes that were able to topple an entire civilization. So in one of the booklets I've written called Conversations Between a Philosopher and a Saint, and you have a picture of Socrates on one side and Srila Prabhupada on the other side. And in that book I write on page number 7. Without a correct and comprehensive understanding of the purpose of life in this world, mankind cannot plan how to have a successful life. With wrong answers, man or mankind is forced to suffer helplessly by violating the laws of nature due to ignorance. This is the key point, violating the laws of nature due to ignorance. There is a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that sheds light on this question. It says, nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, 21st verse. According to Vedic philosophy, living entities and material nature are both eternal or without beginning and without end. The living entities are eternal souls with individuality and limited free will. Their free will is limited to either accepting or rejecting God's instructions or Krishna's instructions. Depending on which way they decide, there are consequences. By accepting God's instructions as the guiding principles of life, one gradually becomes free from the influence of the three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, that condition us to be attached to the temporary body and its temporary pleasures and pains. By rejecting God's instructions, one becomes entangled by the reactions to activities that breach natural laws. Possible consequences of such errant behavior are natural cataclysms, body ailments, trouble caused by other living beings, and repeated birth and death in an endless cycle because the soul is eternal. The soul can be eternally liberated or eternally chained to a cycle of repeated birth and death. The only redeeming possibility is that at any time an eternally conditioned soul suffering in this world of illusion can choose to surrender to the will of God or Krishna. Then his destiny is changed and he can free himself from the cycle of birth and death. God's instruction, as revealed by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita and other bona fide scriptures like the Bible, Quran, etc., gives an explicit detail of forbidden activities that will result in adverse reactions and prescribed duties that free one from the cycle of suffering. The Bible, Quran, and Torah have the 10 Commandments and other codes to regulate human behavior. The Vedas have 4 regulative principles to avoid and 4 to do. To avoid. To avoid what? To avoid misery in life. First, meat eating, including red meat, chickens, fish, etc. 2, illicit sex outside of marriage, and in marriage only for procreation. In other words, in marriage, engaging in sex only for procreation. 3, gambling and or philosophical speculation. And number 4, intoxication, including coffee and tea. Those are the things to avoid. And to do, 1, read and discuss holy scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and other Vedas like the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Ishopanishad and the Nectar of Devotion, etc. 2, eat only sanctified vegetarian foods that have been offered first to God, to Krishna. 3, chant and meditate on God's names or Krishna's names, holy mantras like the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Number 4, volunteer for service in the temple or house of God in the association of holy devotees. So these are the things to avoid and these are the things to do in order to live according to the laws of nature. And who established those laws? The lawmaker is Krishna himself, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Further, the Vedas recommend 9 favorable activities to develop spiritual consciousness. Daily hearing, chanting, and remembering the glories of God. Serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. praying to the Supreme Lord, worshiping the Supreme Lord, becoming the servant of the Supreme Lord, making friendship with and surrendering everything completely to the Supreme Personality Godhead. Anyone, several or any one of these or several or all of these principles will cause one to develop spiritual consciousness, which means one acts with the knowledge that God is the supreme controller and proprietor of nature. God has a plan how the living entities can live in this world happily and at last attain liberation from the suffering of birth, old age, disease, and death. So this is very important. There's a saying in the Arabic language, whoever made the lock also made the key to open or close the lock. So Krishna, he reveals in the Bhagavad Gita that in the beginning of time he sent forth men and demigods and gave them, multitudes of men and demigods, and gave them a system of sacrifice, performing which one can receive all desirable things to live happily and peacefully in this world, and at the end of life, go back to Godhead. This is the whole plan of the Lord. Saha yagya praja sristva pururava puravacha prajapati ananya parsavistya dvam esavosvista kamaduk. So, the Supreme Personality Godhead, Krishna, the Lord of all living creatures, all worlds and all beauties, and the protector of everyone. The Lord created this material world to enable the conditioned souls to learn how to perform yagyas, sacrifices, for the satisfaction of Vishnu, so that while in the material world they can live very comfortably without anxiety, and after finishing the present material body, they can enter into the kingdom of God. That is the whole process, or whole program for the conditioned soul. By performance of yajna, the conditioned souls gradually become Krishna conscious and become godly in all respects. In the present age, called Kali Yuga, or the age of hypocrisy and quarrel, the Sankirtan Yajna, or the chanting of the holy names of God, is recommended by the Vedic scriptures as the prescribed or the most favorable, chanting of the name of God to achieve this liberation. And it's called the recommended yajna, or sacrifice that one can perform. And this is something that anyone can do. It doesn't require years of study or any degrees. Any person from the time they're able to speak till the last breath that they have can chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And it is the only yajna that's recommended, or sacrifice that's recommended in this age, because it's very easy to do. So the Lord Chaitanya, the incarnation of Krishna that appeared 500 years ago, brought this mantra and recommended it for salvation of all humanity from the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. So this transcendental system was introduced by Lord Chaitanya for the deliverance of all men in this age, all people in this age. Sankirtan Yajna and Krishna consciousness go well together. Lord Krishna, in his devotional form as Lord Chaitanya, is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto, 5th chapter, 32nd verse as follows, with special reference to the Sankirtan Yajna. Krishna Varnam Chisak Krishna Sangapangastra Parasadam Yajnai Sankirtana Parar Yajanti Hisu Medasaha. In this age of Kali, hypocrisy and quarrel, people who are endowed with sufficient intelligence will worship the Lord, who is accompanied by his associates by performance of Sankirtan Yajna, or the chanting of the holy names of God in congregation, either at home, in a temple, or in public. Other yajnas, or sacrifices, prescribed in the Vedic literatures are not easy to perform in this age of Kali. But the Sankirtan Yajna, sacrifice, is easy and sublime for all purposes, as recommended in the Bhagavad Gita also, 9th chapter, 14th verse. Satatam kirtayantamam chitantascha jitavrata namasyantas chamam bhaktya nityayukta upasate. So this verse in Bhagavad Gita, which validates what Lord Chaitanya was teaching 500 years ago, says that my devotees, Krishna says, always chant my glories. They endeavor with great determination, bowing down before me. These great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. So this is the symptom of a person who's on the fast track to become free of material conditioning, by purifying their misconceptions. And the number one misconception is to think that I can become the dominator, the controller, and enjoyer of some part of material nature through business or through my intelligence or cleverness, etc. This dominating, let's say, propensity of all living entities, whether they're in the fish world, aquatic world, or insect world, or the plants, or the human beings, or animals, or human beings, reptiles, or demigods, that domineering, let's say, tendency to exploit and enjoy material nature is a perverted, let's say, idea and concept, or norm, let's say, of human beings and all living beings. And that's because of that we suffer. Whenever we try to enjoy independent of God, it is followed by suffering. And we're seeing that now. We in our country, the United States, it had a booming economy up until about 3 weeks ago. And because of a virus, now there's a catastrophic situation where people are losing their jobs, the economy is going down and dramatically, and who knows when this is going to end. So we have to understand that by violating the laws of nature established by God, the creator of nature and of everything, there are consequences. And the consequences are repeatedly seen throughout history in the form of earthquakes and hurricanes and floods and tsunamis and severe weather conditions, very cold, very hot and dry, and then also pandemics, viruses, diseases, war, economic downturns, economic collapse, and so forth. This is the history of the world. There are periods where things seem to be going good, and then people naturally distance themselves from spirituality and become hedonistic and self-indulgent, and then there's excessive self-indulgence, and all of a sudden there's tragedy and let's say a collapse of societies or countries, and then chaos, and then again there's another building up and recovering from such disaster, and then again a period of opulence or prosperity, and again degradation, moral degradation, and then again disaster. So why, if we can read history, we see this has been the normal, when I say normal, this has been a recurrent phenomenon throughout nature, so and civilization. So why should we not question it, and what is causing it? So first of all, the do's and don'ts that we just read are to avoid such disasters, because then we will live according to God's plan. So let's go a little bit further. And then engaging in 9 favorable activities to develop spiritual consciousness. So 4 things to avoid, 4 things to do, and then further things to do to develop spiritual consciousness and a peaceful, prosperous society, and then everyone attains liberation at the end of life. So God's plan is to free mankind of suffering in the material world, and for everyone in return, and for everyone to return to the spiritual world. First, it entails recognizing that God is the supreme controller and owner of nature and everything in it, including our body, senses, mind, and intelligence. Once people recognize this fact, they can learn to use everything in nature to serve the purpose of God rather than trying to usurp God's creation for their selfish purposes. This change of worldview is the beginning of real human life and the foundation by which humanity can merit salvation. If mankind dedicates time, energy, and resources to serve God's pleasure, then nature and time, or God's will, then nature and time, which are both controlled by God, will support and cooperate to help people to reach the goal of eternal life. We all were originally in the spiritual world with God, but we are endowed with limited free will. So therefore, like in the allegory of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in paradise, they had everything they needed for living happily and eternally. The only thing is they were forbidden to eat from this one tree, the tree of knowledge and death. And by disobeying that one, let's say, command of God, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden, and then women are forced to have childbirth and rearing children, and men are forced to work with the sweat of their brow, etc. And life becomes a big struggle. Struggle, why? Because people want to enjoy independent of God, and to do that they want to have control over some part of nature. Well, the first principle that one must understand to have a godly life is that everything belongs to God, or Krishna. We have no right to usurp anything. And according to the Ishopanishad, God has set aside for every living entity their minimal needs, and accepting the minimum and using anything above that for the service of God is the only way people can live peacefully and happily in this world. Therefore it says, Ishavaisham idam sarvam jatkinja jagatyam jagat tenataktena bunjitaha magritaha kasusidvanam. The mantra 1 of the Ishopanishad says that God is the supreme proprietor of everything. Everything that exists is owned and controlled by Lord Krishna. But the Lord, out of his kindness, has set aside for every living entity, that goes from the aquatics to the human beings, their minimal needs. Taking the minimum and using everything else in the service of God will keep a person from infringing on the laws of nature, and they can live happily, healthily, with health and prosperity, and at the end of life go back to Godhead. So this concept of property is essential to understand, because the concept of property is the basis on which societies are organized. So you have capitalist society, you have socialist societies, you have communist societies, you have monarchy, you have fascism or dictatorships, and you have also anarchy. These are all based on a principle of proprietorship. In anarchy, no one's the proprietor. And in dictatorship, the dictator and his cronies, the military establishment, maybe some industrial sort of proprietors. But basically the dictator is the proprietor, and his family, and etc. And then in monarchy, the king and nobles are proprietors. And in a communist society, the community, the commune is the proprietor. No one has individual proprietorship. And in socialism, the government is the proprietor. And in capitalism, the individual is the proprietor. And then there are hybrids of each one of these. But in any case, the concept of proprietorship is at the basis of social organization. So, but no one is happy in any one of those systems. Why? Because they're all wrong. The only system that's right is that God is the proprietor, and not only that, God has set aside for everyone their minimal needs. So therefore, if we understand that we're not meant to be lavish or decadent in our living style, our style of living should always be very, let's say, minimal. You need a place to sleep, you need some clothing, you need food, healthy food, no junk food, and then you need some heat and light, etc. These things are necessities, and they can be limited to a healthy and prosperous life. Prosperous means that you live at home without any debt. Therefore, you have no worries, and you live in a simple environment like a farm. I mean, this country, the United States, was started by pioneers, and they lived in small communities, and they mainly grew their own food, etc. So now we're going to see what this means exactly as far as the organization of society. So we all have limited free will. So disobeying the laws of nature, or God's instructions, brings ruin to a human being and society. The root cause of sin is deliberate disobedience of the laws of nature and God through disregarding the proprietorship of the Lord. Endowed with free will, man needs to be educated how to properly exercise it. Making decisions based on knowledge and certitude that we are subordinate to God's will and that we cannot achieve anything without the approval of God helps us to determine right action from wrong. Ignorance of this fact leads us to make fundamental mistakes and violate natural laws that bring about misfortune and suffering. The Bible states, "Thou shalt not kill." This sounds simple and unequivocal, yet it is the subject of speculation. It is generally understood to mean one should not murder another human being, yet the word kill refers to any kind of killing, not only murder of humans. It includes animals, especially the cow and other living entities. Misinterpreting this direct law of God causes continual suffering because following a wrong conclusion about killing can destroy any hopes one has of living peacefully and achieving genuine love of God. One cannot disobey God and receive his favor and protection throughout life. To avoid speculation, one needs to understand this law of nature from an authority in Vedic knowledge. The Manu Samhita, considered the law book of the Vedas and Vedic culture and society, states in Chapter 5 that there are very restricted conditions under which one may eat meat, but never the meat of cows. Those conditions are limited to animals that are permitted for sacrifice by priests. One is never permitted to just kill or purchase meat for consumption outside of ritually slaughtered animals. If you read the following texts, you will see that meat eating is severely restricted and, in fact, not encouraged. So I'm going to read now from some verses of the Manu Samhita and fifth chapter, 27th verse. One may eat meat when it has been sprinkled with water, while mantras are recited, while prayers are recited, when Brahmins desire you to do it, when one is engaged in the performance of a rite or ritual, according to the law, and when one's life is in danger. Text 31. The consumption of meat is befitting for sacrifices. It is declared to be a rule made by the gods, but to persist in using it on other occasions is said to be a proceeding worthy of demonic beings. Text 37. If one has a strong desire for meat, he may make an animal of clarified butter or ghee and one of flour and eat that. But then let him never seek to destroy an animal without a lawful reason. As many hairs, text 38, as many hairs on the slain beast has, as many hairs the slain beast has, so often indeed will the person who killed that animal without a lawful reason suffer a violent death in future births. So we see persons who kill cows, sheep, lamb, or goats, etc. Try and count how many hairs that animal has, and the karmic, let's say, reaction to such a beastly event is to be killed in many future births and deaths, as many times as there are hairs on the body of that animal. Whereas if one has a desire to eat meat, it's better to make a form of an animal of clarified butter and flour and eat that. So, text 39. Manu himself created animals for the sake of sacrifice. Sacrifice has been instituted for the good of the whole world. Hence, the slaughtering of beasts for sacrifice is not slaughtering in the ordinary sense of the word. So, to understand what is meant here, in the previous age, not this age, in the previous age of time, which was before 5,000 years ago, different Vedic sacrifices were performed where there were animals as part of that sacrifice. But the priests at that time were highly qualified. Therefore, to test the fact that they performed the sacrifice correctly and said the Vedic prayers or mantras correctly, they would sacrifice an old cow and say the mantras, and they were able to rejuvenate the cow into a young calf. In other words, at that time, no one had the right to kill unless they could rejuvenate the dead animal. And the Brahmins or priests had that power at that time. But when the present age began, which is called Kali Yuga, the priests lost that power. And therefore, instead of pulling out a rejuvenated calf from the old body of the cow, they were ending up with a barbecue. And therefore, such animal sacrifices are forbidden in this age of Kali, of hypocrisy and quarrel. But in previous 3 ages of time to this age, those sacrifices were permitted to be performed because the Brahmins were able to resuscitate the dead animal and rejuvenate its life. So, we see that in the Old Testament, there are animal sacrifices in the temple of David in Jerusalem. And they were quite extensive. All kinds of animals were being sacrificed, from cows to birds, etc. But Jesus stopped it, or tried to stop it. And because he was not listened to, he was crucified, 70 years later, that temple was destroyed, and the sacrifice stopped. So we see that there's a dire consequence whenever people disregard the instructions of God. So then it says, text 45, he who desires to please himself by injuring peaceful beings will never find happiness, neither living nor dead. 46, text 46, he who does not seek to cause the sufferings of imprisonment and death to living creatures, but desires the good of all beings, obtains endless bliss. He who does not injure any creature attains without an effort what he thinks of, what he undertakes, and what he meditates on in his mind. Text 48. Meat can never be obtained without injury to living creatures, and injury to sentient beings is detrimental to the attainment of heavenly bliss. Let him therefore shun the use of meat. So we see, although animals were permitted for sacrifice in the previous age of time, not now, not since 5,000 years. And because the Brahmins or the priests were able to rejuvenate or resuscitate the dead old cow into a living young calf. Therefore, And it was a test to see if they performed the sacrifice correctly and if they said the mantras correctly. But no other type of sacrifice of animals was permitted. And therefore, in general, meat eating was forbidden, even in previous ages. Only lowest class people would eat meat, and they would be punished if they were caught. So then it says, he who disregarding the rules given above, does not eat meat like a pisacha, an eater of raw flesh, becomes dear to men and will not be tormented by diseases. So you see that either one has to ritually sacrifice an animal, but yet can bring it back alive again, or they refrain completely from eating meat. And if they don't, then they'll be tormented by diseases. This Manusamhita was written over 5,000 years ago. And verse 51, he who permits the slaughter of an animal, who cuts it up, he who kills it, he who buys or sells the meat, he who cooks it, he who serves it up, and he who eats it, must all be considered as slayers of the animal. So in other words, the person who permits it, the person who commits the crime of killing the animal, slaughtering the animal, the person who cuts up the body of the animal, and who buys or sells the meat, who cooks it, who serves it up, and who eats it, all are going to suffer for killing an animal. And it's considered one of the most dastardly, sinful things that a human being can do, that is let's say, injurious, because causing harm to an innocent animal will cause harm to the person who does it, or any person that's involved in the process of killing, permitting, killing, cutting up, selling, transporting, and eating, etc. Text 52. There is no greater sinner than that man who, though not worshiping God or the forefathers, seeks to increase the bulk of his own flesh by the flesh of other beings. So this is all from chapter 5 of the Manusamhita, written thousands and thousands of years ago. The laws of Manu were spoken and preserved in oral tradition long before the appearance of Lord Krishna, which was over 5,000 years ago. After the disappearance of Lord Krishna, the age of Kali, hypocrisy and quarrel, began over 5,000 years ago. Because people in this age have poor memories, Manu's laws were written down. With the advent of the age of Kali, more restrictions came into effect because of the lack of qualification of the Brahmana priestly class. And then finally, text 53 of the Manusamhita. 5 things are forbidden in the age of Kali: horse sacrifice, cow sacrifice, acceptance of sannyasa, or becoming a mendicant preacher, but it's specifically for those mendicant preachers who are impersonalists, and offering flesh to the forefathers and begetting a child in the womb of the wife of one's brother. This is from the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, and also. So, almost all the rituals in which meat was required to be offered were eliminated with the advent of the present age. The only possibility for ritual meat in this age of Kali is the following. License is given to meat eaters to sacrifice a black goat once a month on the new moon night. It is strictly forbidden to purchase a commercially slain animal for consumption. The person who wants to eat meat must kill the goat on a dark or new moon night under the supervision of a priest who instructs him to repeat the following mantra before cutting the throat of the goat. Mamsa kadati mamsaha. The Sanskrit mamsaha means mam, me, and sa, he. And the translation is, I am killing this animal, I am eating it. In my next life, he will kill and eat me. Before the animal is sacrificed, this mantra is recited into the ear of the animal. You are giving your life, so in your next life you will get the opportunity of becoming a human being, and I, who am now killing you, will become an animal and you will kill me. The purpose of the ritual and the repetition of the mantra is to contain unrestricted meat eating by forcing the meat eater to kill the animal himself and witness the horror of the act, as well as to repeat the mantra that reveals the consequences of such an act. Such regulation is meant to discourage the meat eater by making him understand that he will be held accountable for such unnecessary killing. Unrestricted meat eating is strictly forbidden in this age. So, why did we show this video that's on YouTube? Because the persons that made it very intelligently showed that the cause of this present virus is eating what's called in China exotic meat, animals that normally people would not eat, such as bats and the pandilla and lizards and snakes and I guess cockroaches and whatever they eat in these wet markets. And the wet markets is not only in China, they're in Thailand, they're in the Philippines, they're all over the Far East. But actually, they make a very good point. What's the difference between eating a chicken or a pig or sheep or goats or rabbits or frogs or whatever they eat in the United States and in Europe and in other countries, and eating a bat or a rat or etc.? Even though they try to have hygienic conditions, but we know that the level of hygiene is very low in slaughterhouses and even in the United States. So there's no difference. It's a dead body. It's dead. It's dead flesh. And plus it's an animal that's been killed against its will. Like when they are going to kill these animals, the animals start screaming and trying to get away, but there's no way they can do that. So we see that animals are like human beings. No human being wants to be slaughtered and eaten, and no animal wants to be slaughtered and eaten. And usually the animal is thinking, you're doing this to me, may it happen to you in the same way. That's why we should never engage in such horrors. So almost all rituals in which meat was required to be offered were eliminated and forbidden in this age of Kali. So it is not only the person who eats the meat that becomes implicated, but also those who assist in the process. From the Vedic point of view, people who eat meat or participate in providing it, especially cow meat, are condemned to suffer for their brutal acts. This point was emphasized again over 500 years ago by Lord Chaitanya, who is an incarnation of Lord Krishna, in this age of Kali, to Chankazi, a Muslim scholar of the Quran. He explained a statement in the Bhagavad Gita. The statement in Bhagavad Gita 18.44, 18th chapter, 44th verse. The duty of Vaishyas, businessmen and agriculturalists, is to produce agricultural products, trade, and give protection to cows. Thus, in Vedic society, it is imperative to protect cows, not eat them. It is forbidden to kill a cow or a bull in this age. Lord Chaitanya told Chankazi in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 17, verse 166, cow killers are condemned to rot in hellish life for as many thousands of years as there are hairs on the body of the cow. Therefore, modern spiritual teachers, whether in Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, or Judaism, are misleading their faithful followers by engaging them in meat eating, which will result in massive suffering in this life and the next. The ritual killing in Islam and Judaism to obtain halal or hilal meat is also misleading because it includes cows and other innocent animals. Judaism continued the pre-Kali Yuga dietary rules of the Vedas, without reference to the restrictions in this age of Kali to cow sacrifice, as well as ignoring the Vedic purpose of gradually eliminating all animal killing through severely restricted animal sacrifice. Of course, Muslims and Jews have their rules of how to kill an animal, but it's still killing. And if you read the Old Testament of the Bible, right in the Genesis, God, when he's instructing, I guess it's Noah and his sons about meat eating, he says there should not be one drop of blood in the flesh. Now, it is impossible. I'm going to tell you right now, it is impossible, no matter what you do, to avoid one drop of blood in the flesh of an animal. Even if, as the ancient Jews did, put the meat in brine or salt solution for a certain period of time, I think it was up to 3 weeks or more, to have more of a certitude that there was no blood left in the veins or the flesh of the animal. Now, why would God make such a stricture, such a strict rule, not one drop of blood? Well, because it's a warning that why would you risk such a risky and dangerous fate by insisting on eating meat? There's no rules about eating apples or fruits or grains or vegetables. Why is there such a strict rule about eating meat? Because God is trying to restrict it. He's trying to discourage people from even trying. But of course, if you're adamant, you'll try, and you have a great chance of infringing or violating the rule. And we see today that all that has gone down the drain. People just they don't even have ritual killing. Maybe the Jews and the Muslims do, but Christians don't have any ritual killing at all. They just kill the animal and they eat it, and it's called red meat, right? So we can see how seriously there's violation of biblical law, whether by the Muslims, Jews, or Christians, and of course Hindus also. Hindus today, out of 800 or more million Hindus, 50% eat meat. 25% only eat meat outside of the house. And the last number of 25%, which is also diminishing, try and follow strict vegetarianism. So even the Hindus are not following their rules. Okay, so then you have Jains, on the other hand, they're much more strict about meat, not eating meat. And Sikhs are not supposed to eat meat, but they do. Not in their temple, not in their gurudwaras, but outside the gurudwaras. Buddhists are not supposed to eat meat, but they do today. And their priests sort of recommend. I'm not saying all Buddhists, but a large number of them, like Hindus, eat meat, and it's permitted by their priests. So we see that the modern priests, for the most part, are misleading their people. The Old Testament indicated very strict regulations on animal flesh consumption. In Genesis chapter 9, verse 3 to 6, God says, "Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I have given you the green plants, I now give you everything. But you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God, God has made mankind." In these verses, the God of the Bible restricts man from eating animal flesh with blood still in it. Therefore, meat is strictly forbidden unless there is no blood in it. Today it is almost impossible to eat meat without blood in it. The God of the Bible says he will require a reckoning for the blood of every animal man eats, and the same reckoning for the blood of every human being murdered by man. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of the ISKCON, or the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, writes about Jesus Christ in his commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 15, verse number 10. Animal sacrifice in the name of religion is currently practically all over the world in every established religion. It is said that Lord Jesus Christ, when 12 years old, was shocked to see the Jews sacrificing birds and animals in the synagogues. See Mark 11:15-16 in the New Living Testament, New Living Translation of the Bible. And that he therefore rejected the Jewish system of religion and started the religious system of Christianity, adhering to the Old Testament commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." At the present day, however, not only are animals killed in the name of sacrifice, but the killing of animals has increased enormously because of the increasing number of slaughterhouses. Slaughtering animals in the name of religion or for food is most abominable and is condemned herein. Unless one is merciless, one cannot sacrifice animals as a religious act or for food. So this is a direct quote by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th Canto, 15th Chapter, 10th verse. In the case where there is famine and no other food available, the Vedas permit eating animal flesh for survival, but not otherwise. The tragedy of modern life is that the common people are being misled into sinful acts in the name of religion by religious leaders and politicians who are ignorant or purposely ignore the laws of nature as given by God in the different scriptures. When the deep meaning of "thou shalt not kill" is realized, one refrains from unnecessary killing. St. Paul in the Bible wrote, "It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything else that will cause your brother to fall. So whatever you believe about these things, keep between yourselves and God. Blessed is the man who does not condemn himself by what he approves. But the man who has doubts is condemned if he eats, because his eating is not from faith. And everything that does not come from faith is sin." Romans 14:21-23. We should have faith that God loves all his creatures. Therefore, we should not kill if we can avoid it. The principle of ahimsa, nonviolence, is not to cause harm to others verbally, physically, or by withholding information about God's instructions for mankind. Unnecessary killing will bring disaster upon mankind, as we are seeing today. Therefore, the four regulative principles of Vedic life, no meat, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling, are meant to help us avoid breaking the laws of nature and thus suffering. By living according to the correct understanding of God's instructions, we can avoid unnecessary suffering and bring about a pacification of nature by which mankind can live peacefully. Without pleasing God, we become victim of our own ignorance and misdeeds by breaking the laws of nature, for which there will be a reckoning. So, I wanted to share this with you today. This is a book that I've written, Conversations Between a Philosopher and a Saint. The enemy is misinformation. And unless we have a clear understanding of what God wants and what God doesn't want, without speculation, without accommodation over time to so-called new realities, that is a perfect formula for misinterpreting the words of God. We should strictly follow the Vedic tradition, and there are strong hints of that same tradition in Christianity and Islam. Like, for example, Hazrat Ali said, "Don't make your stomach a grave for dead bodies." He was also advocating a vegetarian diet for Muslims. And there's a whole movement amongst Muslims to become vegetarians and not to unnecessarily kill during Eid al-Fitr and other massive festivals where there's massive killing of animals. And the same thing has happened in Hinduism. They have Gadimai Puja in Nepal, where every 5 years they kill over 60 million animals, slaughter them, and many of them are cows and bulls also. And they ship the meat to Delhi to be sold in restaurants, etc. So this has got to stop. whether in one religion or the other, but especially in the Vedic Sanatan Dharma, it must not happen, because Hinduism is an offshoot of Sanatan Dharma, and Hindu priests have to strictly tell their people not to engage in any type of meat eating. It's not that it's better to eat a chicken than a cow. Well, even if that's true, still the chicken is a living being, and it has a right to live just as you do. So the principle of empathy, do unto others as you shall have them do unto you. The golden rule should be followed in all conditions. It's not only applicable to human beings, it applies to cows also. So I will stop right now, and then we'll continue later on today and next week. We're going to explain the alternative to this type of civilization, a return to the ancient Vedic tradition of civilization in which there's minimal violence committed on all types of animals and human beings, etc. And there is prosperity, there's peace, there's happiness, and there's liberation from the whole cycle of birth and death, and returning to where we naturally belong, and that's the spiritual world, where everything is eternal, blissful, and fully cognizant. So thank you very much. Hari Bol, Hare Krishna.